Okay, so let's go back over what we talked about with Rome, the Republic. Um, don't forget the vision in Daniel chapter 2, I believe. Let's go back. Yep. Daniel chapter 2, verses 1 through 48 goes through the vision that King Nebuchadnezzar had, and all of the different um, parts of the statue that represent the areas and events that we've already studied specifically regarding the Hellenistic age. Okay, so let's start off talking about Rome's geography. Um, Geographically speaking, Rome has a fantastic access to the Mediterranean Sea. The terrain of their surrounding area, they've got fertile hills, not mountains like Greece, so this is going to make agriculture just a whole lot easier. Their harbors are incredibly calm, so for trade, this is excellent because you have very little to inhibit anyone coming to you or you going to anyone else. But also having hills and having this relatively nice geography, this is going to mean that the Italian peninsula is going to be much more easily unified because there's much better communication than what the Greeks had. The exact date for the founding of Rome is unknown, but archaeological evidence suggests that 753 BCE as the year. This would be around about the same time as the Greeks beginning to establish colonies around the Mediterranean. The Roman legend of Rome's founding was important to all Romans for centuries, and you're going to need to be familiar with these legends. The story of the founding of Rome goes like this. A Trojan hero escaped vanquished in the Trojan War, and one of his female descendants sought to live only for the gods. So the Roman god Mars found her and had an affair with her, and she gave birth to twin boys, their names being Romulus and Remus. Her uncle didn't believe her story and threw the baby boys into the river. However, soon thereafter, a shepherd found the boys being nursed by a she-wolf. So the farmer took the boys as his own and raised them as his own, but when the twins grew up, Romulus wound up killing his brother Remus, making him king of Rome and thus naming the city for Romulus. The statue at the bottom right is the Etruscan she-wolf, and it commemorates the story. The wolf itself was sculpted in the 5th century, but the boys were added much, much later during the Italian Renaissance. The other legend that I would like for you to be familiar with is the legend of the Sabines. The painting in the upper right is a rendition of this legend. The story goes like this. Basically, Romulus and his men didn't have any women, or didn't have many women, and they needed women in order for their society to continue to grow. So they start putting out feelers, as it were, to the different people around and say, hey, we want to make a connection with you. We would like to have your women. And in return, you know, you get to be Romans and all that jazz. So yeah, the Sabines were like, not no, but heck no. Get out of here, you ruffians. So, and I'm sure they talk just like that. So we have the Romans, kind of like the Trojan War. They create a ruse, right? They throw a party for the Sabines, and they're like, hey, yeah, no hard feelings, no worries, dude. And then they kidnap the women. So they kidnap the women, run off with them, and over a year later, the Sabine men are back to get their women. And during the battle, the women are so upset that they come running out and they place themselves in between their husbands and fathers of their children and their fathers, their brothers, their uncles. So they come out, and you can see sort of right there in the middle, there's a woman there, and there's a woman there holding up a baby. And they're saying, no, don't kill each other, kill us. And these women were highly regarded and thought very well of for their valor and for their virtue. And so the fighting stopped, and the Sabines were absorbed into Rome. Both of these legends show us some of the main characteristics of the Romans. So, for example, the legend of Romulus and Remus and the epic battle which took place between those two brothers really shows us that the Romans promote violence and death. They sort of bathe in violence. This is just a part of their life, and they're totally okay with it. The Sabines, the Sabine legend, shows how Rome expanded by absorbing outsiders. Now, this is slightly different from the Greeks, because the Greeks think they're better than everyone else. And there's very little idea of acceptance of other people into Greek culture and becoming Greek citizens and whatnot. So these two legends are important to help us understanding the Romans. Herodotus, the ancient historian, claimed the Etruscans came from Lydia in Asia Minor, and fairly recently DNA evidence did confirm this, and they enjoyed the good life. Most of their writings have not been deciphered, though, so a lot of what we know about them comes from archaeological evidence, specifically their artwork. The Etruscans really are, in many ways, the first Romans. They ruled Rome for a while, and the Roman Empire gleamed much from Etruscan culture. They learned to drain marshes, to build sewers, to build with arch and vault construction, which changes from the post and lintel construction of the ancient Greeks. Romans also really liked the Etruscan toga. Thought that was a pretty good look, so they took that on. What else? They took the Etruscan written language, transforming it to fit their language of Latin. So it seems that the Etruscans held the Roman monarchy until about 509 BC. Now, during the establishment of Rome, we see evidence of Roman values really coming into play. And Roman values, ultimately, the idea is we are going to maintain order. We will have stability in that order. And by having peace and stability, we will have prosperity. The gods will have favor on us. So 3 of the main Roman values I'd like for you to be familiar with. Mos Maiorum, the way of the elders. This means that if anything has been tried and true, then it's tested by time. It's okay. It's good. But anything new that's introduced is dangerous. So you treat it as cautiously as you would treat a new neighbor's pit bull, right? Yeah, he says he doesn't bite, but do you really want to put a newborn baby with it? I mean, yeah, probably not. So, so anyway, you would be cautious. Virtus, manly virtue, right? Strength, loyalty, courage, wisdom, moral purity. This is not just the idea of physically being strong or any other like totally physical characteristics. This really is about emotional and mental strength, intelligence, highly favored, but not just intelligence, a common sense, right? Also, it's the idea of placing the country interests first. Anybody who's selfish, you don't really like selfish people, do you? No, selfish people annoy me. They probably annoy you too. So the idea of virtus is if you think of yourself or your family before you think of the republic, you're being selfish. So to display virtus, you must place the country's interests first. And then lastly, fides, or faithfulness. Respect really is the highest form of faithfulness. And the way that you can show respect to others is by keeping your obligations no matter the cost, right? And we see this played out probably the best in the patron-client system. I like to refer to the patron-client system as social networking at its creepiest. Because I just find it really odd. Among the Roman social classes were two groups of people. There were patrons and clients. A patron was a powerful and wealthy member of society. It does not necessarily mean that this man was patrician. They could possibly be plebeian, but they were definitely of a superior status. And they were expected to exert moral authority over their clients. So in that way, the clients would be better citizens. They would follow the example of their patrons. A client was someone who benefited from a patron. So clients could be from any social class, but most of them were farmers. So if they had a bad crop one year, if they were struggling to pay rent or anything like that, they could go to their patron. Their patron would help them. And clients would, in return, show their gratitude to their patrons through loyalty. So, for example, the center of politics was in the Forum, which was a large gathering place that included the Senate chamber, the People's Assembly, as well as the Speaker's platform. And clients would cheer loudly when their patron got up to speak and cry out more loudly in an attempt to drown out the patron's opponents. So, not just mudslinging, we're just going to try to make it to where you can't even hear them. These mutual obligations between patron and client could endure for generations. So, a patron's grandson could technically wind up being patron to his grandfather's client or client's children. Social stability and well-being were achieved by faithfully, there's that word again, maintaining these established relationships. So, once again, the Etruscans, it seems that they held the Roman monarchy until somewhere around about 509 BCE. And then many Romans rebelled against the monarchy. There's a story that there was a noblewoman who was raped by a relative of the king, and in response to this, her name was Lucretia, she killed herself in an effort to save face, right? In an effort to not be publicly humiliated or to humiliate her family. And when this happens, it supposedly rallied all of the Romans together to overthrow the Etruscans. Once the monarchy was overthrown, no matter what the reason, we see the establishment of a republic government. To the Romans, this republic meant the power rested with the people, who were represented by smaller groups of people. Now, with the Roman monarchy, they had a Senate established, which was a council of men who were expected to advise the king, because Roman culture called for those in leadership to get counsel before making decisions, right? So within this republic that they develop, there's very much this idea of we have to make sure that no one can gain unnecessary soul power, right? Social relations between the patricians and the plebeians deteriorated, and in the 5th century there is a rise to the struggle of the orders. The poor wanted protection from abuses by the wealthy, and wealthier plebeians wanted really a larger role in the government. Plebeians were never fully excluded, but it does appear that patricians were given more opportunity than their plebeian counterparts. So plebeians elected tribunes to represent them, and eventually they were able to gain some rights. The first and probably most important was the written law code, referred to as the 12 Tables. This was kind of like their constitution in a way. It's the easiest thing I can relate it to. It established a consistent set of laws to be enforced. And within these laws, we do see plebeians and the poor granted greater equality as well as social mobility. So they're allowed sort of to kind of move up. Not all the time, but there is that sort of that possibility. And ultimately, the people believe that fair laws are going to protect them against civil unrest, but also protect them from the abuses of what could come with monarchy. So there's a picture of the forum. This is where all the political action would take place. So let's talk about governing the republic. Really, we have an oligarchical rule. It consisted of three parts: consuls, senate, and assemblies. Sort of like the executive branch, if you will, was two men called consuls. Every year, two men were elected to serve as consuls, and one consul could even veto the other, right? They were voted in each year to serve simultaneously, and we do see out of different pieces of legislation and whatnot that there is a law eventually passed requiring one of the consuls to be from the plebeian class. The Senate was sort of like the next branch of government, and it never went away. But it did gain more prominence in governing. The Senate was a body of elder statesmen that existed to advise the consuls. Lastly, there were the assemblies. Adult male citizens made up the assemblies. They could vote on matters, but by a group, not as an individual. So this is different from Athenian democracy that we discussed before. As time progresses and Rome gained more power, they desired to spread its borders. Land hunger was probably not the only driving force behind its spread, but whatever the reason, we see in the 4th century BCE that Rome became allies with other Latin-speaking tribes and started calling themselves the Latin League. Some years later, the allies revolted against Rome, but they were very unsuccessful. So Rome squashed the rebellion and dissolved the league. But here's something that's very different about the Romans here. Instead of enslaving them or destroying them, Rome offered varying degrees of citizenship. So if you think back to that legend of the Sabines, they're absorbing different people. The conquered peoples were probably rather appreciative that they weren't killed or enslaved. So this policy only strengthened Rome. And by the end of the 3rd century, Rome covered most of the Italian peninsula. In 387, however, the Gauls, which these are, the Romans referred to them as barbarians, right, from the north, really like modern-day France. The Gauls sacked the city of Rome, which obviously is going to shake them, right? Roman fear of invasion only increases Roman imperialism. That means they're spreading out, they're conquering other land. So this is a part of their policy, is that we have to make sure that we can defend the city, right? We need to defend the city. We need to defend our citizens. The republic comes first. And so really by the year 220 BCE, we see the entirety of the Italian peninsula really belonging to Rome. So here you can see an example of that. And this really is kind of going a little bit further. We're not quite there yet. So, Who was in the Roman army? Um, Only men could be in the Roman army, no women. Every Roman soldier was a Roman citizen. He had to be at least like 20 years old, not supposed to get married while he's a soldier. Um, Most soldiers in the Roman Empire, okay, so we're in the Republic right now, but in the Empire, they came from countries outside of Italy. So from Africa, from Gaul, Germania, Spain, maybe some from the Middle East. Sorry for the wiggling around there. Um, so lots of soldiers from different places. There were about 30 legions in the Roman army. Each legion had between 4,000 and 6,000 soldiers called legionnaires. Each legion had 10 cohorts, and each cohort was made up of about 6 troops. And these troops were referred to as centuries because they had somewhere around about 100, give or take a few, soldiers within the century. And their leader, of course, was called a centurion. A centurion's rather interesting. A centurion carried a short rod to show his importance, and he could use that stick to beat any soldier who disobeyed an order. But the officer commanding the whole legion was called a legate. Now, there was a policy and a process that was implemented at some point called decimation. And decimation is the idea that, okay, if at any time the men don't perform well, if at any time they disobey orders or anything like that, they would get their men together and they would select 1 in 10 to kill. And this was called decimation. So, really good way of sort of ensuring people listen to you. Legionnaires were the best Roman soldiers as well as the best paid, but there were other soldiers. An auxiliary was a soldier who was not a Roman citizen. He was paid somewhere about a third as much as a legionnaire. Auxiliaries guarded forts and frontier land, but also fought in battles, often on the front lines, right? Because they're not Roman citizens. This is the most dangerous place. Some soldiers had special skills. They shot bows and arrows. They used slingshots, swam in rivers to surprise an enemy, kind of like, modern day commando people. Artillery soldiers fired catapults. Let's see what else. They would use like wind-up crossbows. So yeah, they use lots of other things within the artillery. Usually Romans like to fight on foot, but they did use the cavalry or soldiers that rode horses to chase an enemy who was fleeing. In a battle, the cavalry also, the cavalry often lined up on either side of the infantry. What we know about Roman armor and weapons really comes from like pictures and statues and also from archaeological evidence. A Roman soldier wore armor made from strips of iron and leather. On his head was a metal helmet, and he carried a rectangular shield which was curved so that it could protect his body. The shield itself was made of wood and leather. The soldier's main weapons were a short sword for stabbing and a long spear or javelin for throwing. The soldiers also wore sandals, and as we talked about, this was probably one of the most remarkable remarkable pieces of their uniform. They were designed to help Romans march for long distances. They were very strong. They were well ventilated. They also allowed the soldiers to march very quickly because they often had metal studs at the bottom so they would make them last longer. Roman soldiers, their training consisted of running, marching, sparring, which is practicing their fighting. They could march like 20 miles a day wearing their armor, and remember that armor's made out of iron, right? Iron and leather. They could swim or cross rivers in boats, build bridges, and smash their way into forts. Each man carried his weapons and shield, as well as some food and camping equipment. So these guys are loaded down, but they are disciplined so well to obey these commands that they just go and do it. They're probably one of their greatest feats or greatest contributions to Roman conquest was their engineering activities. These guys could build bridges in a matter of days. They could build roads, and pretty much did build roads everywhere they went, which ultimately helped them to conquer and reign. So why was Rome so successful? Well, for a couple of reasons. They've got a whole bunch of people to choose from. And you need people to conquer other people, right? So they've got a whole bunch of people. Also, the Roman government was prepared to lose as many of those troops as it took. They were willing to spend as much money as it took, and they were also willing to fight as long as it took in order to be victorious. The Punic Wars is sort of one of the first major wars that we see Rome involved in. As Rome spread over the Italian peninsula, they started encountering outsiders. Carthage, which was originally a colony of Phoenicia, was on the other side of the Mediterranean, and it didn't like how Rome was taking on so much land. Besides, Carthage was a rival. They kind of wanted their own stuff, right? And around about 264 BC, the Romans faced off with Carthage in the First Punic War. The Romans won this war with a new naval fighting technique. Instead of just ramming into the enemy's boat, Romans began boarding the enemy's ships. The Romans, they're fairly good at sailing, but their military is built and equipped to fight on land. So they put infantry onto the boats. This allowed them to utilize their really fantastic hand-to-hand combat skills. At the end of this war, we see Rome getting its first province, right? Kind of like a colony, but not quite. It's kind of the idea, though. In the Second Punic War, we meet the famous leader Hannibal. After the First Punic War, the two sides signed a treaty dividing some land in Spain. But after some confusion, Carthage attacked a portion that seemingly belonged to Rome. Thus, the Second War began. Hannibal, a Carthaginian general, took the fight to Italy, which is really just like, what? Who does that? He had won a fantastic victory at the Battle of Cannae, where 30,000 Romans died. But the Romans absolutely refused to surrender, so they instituted a delay and wait tactic. They simply refused to fight, causing Hannibal to march his army, which included elephants, right, up and down the Italian peninsula for nearly 17 years. By about that time, a Roman general by the name of Scipio showed up, and he took the fight to Carthage, and Hannibal was defeated in the year 202. Not long after this, there's a guy by the name of Cato the Elder, who is a senator, and he absolutely hated Carthage. And sadly, Carthage was stuck between a rock and a hard place. One of Rome's allies had begun encroaching on Carthage territory, but Carthage couldn't fight without having Rome enter the fray. So Cato the Elder was able to convince the Senate that Rome needed to destroy Carthage, and they did in 146 BC. which ended the third and final Punic War. At the end of this time, Greece and Macedonia are offered friendship, right? They were offered friendship, but really this idea of friendship is more so about the Greeks being loyal to the Romans. They want to institute the patron-client system. Rome wants to be patron to Greece and Macedonia. And they're really not allowed much freedom, at least not what they were accustomed to. 146 BCE, we see Corinth, that once great city-state, destroyed for exerting its independence. We see Rome continuing to expand in 133 BCE, when it inherited parts of Western Asia Minor. And then in 121 BC, we see the southern part of Gaul made into a Roman province. And once again, you can see how they are expanding. The Gracchus brothers. Tiberius was a man who wanted to see reform. This is a man who is very interested in making sure that the Republic comes first. So he developed some policies and legislations to redistribute land to landless farmers. Now, his reforms were not overly popular, but they did pass. They didn't help, a great deal of the financial burden that the Romans found themselves in with their economic depression, but it was something. And when Tiberius announced that he was running for a second term, he was assassinated in the Forum. His brother Gaius rose up a few years later. He attempted to improve the economy, the infrastructure, as well as grain distribution. Probably one of the biggest things, though, is that he wants to offer more people citizenship. And there are some new courts that have been established to try corrupt senators. So, these senators are corrupt for a reason, right? So they're not going to put up with much. And Gaius followed the way of his brother and was assassinated. We see with their deaths the establishment of two political factions known as the Populares and the Optimates. The Populares are those who are supported by the people, right? They're popular. The Optimates are those that are supported by the Senate. Generals began taking more political positions during this time, and more often than not, they were Populares. The first general to really use this to his advantage was a guy by the name of Marius. He created a professional army that did not rely only on men who owned property. What? How dare you? So his men were violently loyal to him because some did not have anything to go home to. And he even promised them land at the end of their service. So that's pretty intense. This makes his army much more loyal to him than to the Republic. And ultimately, his successors would use this method of securing power, and this would cause civil war. Marius' second in command was Lucius Sulla, who was the first general to command the Optimate faction. After Marius retired, Sulla took great power in the Senate. Italian allies rose up in civil war, and Sulla was very successful in squashing the rebellions. But then the Senate became concerned about how much power he was gaining, and Marius came out of retirement. Marius attempted to take power for himself, and Sulla did the absolute unthinkable. He marched on the city of Rome. When that happened, he killed or exiled all of his political opponents, and we see civil war lasting for 2 years. In the process, he named himself dictator. And as we've discussed before, this title was supposed to be reserved for emergencies, and Sulla said this is emergency enough. So with with all of these things happening, we do see a change in values. War is not for defense anymore. It's for gaining plunder, and plunder is not always stuff. Sometimes it's just fame. Sometimes it's glory, right? Soldiers become much more loyal to their general rather than to Rome, and the competition for power is no longer about seeking the community's welfare. The traditional value, particularly of virtus, placing the republic above one's personal interests, basically falls away. Sulla didn't remain in his post long and eventually retired to a quiet life. And this is when we see the rise of the first triumvirate, or rule by three. Pompey was an optimate, Julius Caesar a popularis, and Crassus was a wealthy businessman. All three had military victories, but Julius Caesar was the most popular with the people. He was also quite popular with himself, right? He was full of himself. It's reported that he said, Veni, Vidi, Vici, when he finished a successful campaign, which means I came, I saw, I conquered. Now, Pompey was Caesar's greatest rival. And when the Senate asked him to be sole consul, when they asked Pompey to be sole consul, he agreed, which of course is going to irritate Caesar. So he goes after sole power, and Pompey eventually ran away to Egypt, where he was assassinated. Caesar followed him there, met Queen Cleopatra VII. They have a child together, and then Caesar returned to Rome in the year 46 BCE. When he gets there, he declares himself dictator without end. This is a problem. This angers the Senate. He did not take the title of king because he said he did not want to offend anyone, but he wore royal clothing and established a priesthood to sacrifice to himself as a deity. He claims himself to be a god. Even though Caesar was popular with the people, as you read about in Suetonius' Life of Julius Caesar, many were not happy with the honors that he gave himself. 60 senators conspired against him, and on the Ides of March 44 BCE, they surrounded and stabbed Caesar to death. But the problem that followed was, of course, what do we do now? And the Senate really didn't have much of a plan after that. And with Caesar's death, we really see the death of the Republic. So there you go. That's Rome the Republic in a nutshell. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. Don't forget to study hard. I'll see you guys on Monday.